our third position is currently vacant. So just as a heads up, Susan is joining us as a guest today with the possibility of officially being part of the contract committee, potentially as early as Wednesday at our board meeting coming up. So that is it for comments from the chair, but I'll pause and see if there's any other comments before we jump right in. No? Okay, sounds good. I don't think we have any items for action, although we should probably think about what to use that for in the future. And we'll go right to the items for board recommendation, starting with Kalina. I'll let you take it away.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Bringing before you an amendment to our procurement policy that we've sort of held off for a while. And it is mainly to do with the delegated authority to the general manager. Previously, when we did a major overhaul of the procurement policy in 2017, we brought we created the delegated authority, excuse me, the delegated authorities to the general manager, providing a threshold for those contracts that he or she would be able to authorize without prior board approval or review, as long as they were in alignment with the adopted annual budget or capital community investment plan. So shortly thereafter, the federal government, through the Office of Management and Budget, upped its simplified acquisition threshold. And what that big three-letter word just means is they upped the level, right? So they actually considered simplified procurements to be below $250,000. However, we still had a limit where the Oregon revised statute was concerned of $150,000. And just to give you some context or some boundaries, our procurement policy is, for the most part, a mirror of our overarching purchasing guidelines from the Federal Transit Administration. It's called FTA, Federal Transit Administration Circular 4220.1F. And that provided all of our different thresholds, all of the requirements, all of our audit requirements, all of the contractual terms and conditions that we need to require. And so for the most part, we have adopted that circular as our procurement policies and procedures. In addition, we've worked into our policy what FTA calls its best procurement practices. And they have a manual called the Best Procurement Practices Manual. And so for many of the ways that you buy things and what you buy, we've included many of those best procurement practices into our manual, except where the Oregon revised statute or the Oregon administrative rules are more restrictive. Because for FTA, when they come in and they do their procurement system review, or they do the comprehensive review that happens every 3 years, or now they've gone back to calling it triennial, what they're looking for is not whether or not you're just adhering to all of the federal rules and regulations, but they want to know that you have a policy and that you're following that policy. And within that policy, whether you're holding to the most restrictive requirements within that policy. And so because on top of the federal requirements, you have the requirements from the Oregon revised statute and administrative rules, which many of them are more restrictive. If you're taking a look at our policy, we've held those out and put them in bolded or italicized print to show you that in this particular case, we're going to adhere to the most restrictive rules. So even when the Office of Management and Budget upped the simplified acquisition threshold, we held to the 150 for quite a while. Just recently, the Oregon legislature upped and they decided to increase their simplified acquisition threshold to 250. And at this time, we thought it would be a great time to go ahead and request that the delegated authority for the general manager be increased from 150 to 250. That's really the most major thing. And then, as you may or may not know, because we brought back some minor revisions to the procurement policy over time, our legal counsel does an annual review of our procurement policy to make sure that We are still in alignment with the latest and greatest, whether that's federal, state, or local. And there were some things that they brought up there, you know, where we decided it's not big enough to bring up on its own, but when we have something substantial enough, we'll bring back all of these things to revise. And so that is that entire list of things that we have there on the second page of the AIS. I'm sorry, I'm hopping over there. That we're updating our contracting thresholds. We're adding some language to include requirements for liquidated and delinquent debt to the state of Oregon. That's Oregon Revised Statute. We're clarifying some of our language about retainage and some other minor changes consistent with the ORS, OAR, and FTA, Circular 4221F. So that is, and so our request to you all today, or our recommendation, is that you forward this board, this resolution to the board with the recommendation to approve the amendments to our overall procurement policies and rules as we've requested.
Okay, Michelle, do you have any questions for Kalina or anyone else? I want to start with Michelle since you're our official serving member.
Thanks. I think that it's pretty clear what the intents are here. And I think increasing to 250 makes sense to me at this point. So minor changes with applicable authorities, can you just kind of outline, just give me some idea what those were? Talk.
Hey, Kalina, you're still on mute.
Thank you so much. Even a year and a half after being in this that issue. Okay, so some of those minor changes. So the resolution in itself, we clarify some of the language. There was some of the language where at some points we'd always kind of go back and forth with legal counsel about, okay, this is operating, and the resolution says that the general manager can approve anything that's in the operating budget so long as it's been clearly outlined and it's there. But then we've got the second part that says anything above the language. So we did some things to clarify the language, and those were clarifications that came from Thorpe Purdy just over time as we have been engaging. But also as we've been engaging you as a committee, and you're like, hey, can you tell me why this is a $50,000 contract, but it's still coming to the contract committee? And we're like, well, there's this language in there that says that if it's 10%, if the change is 10% more than the original contract value. And so it's things like that where, as we were working this out over the last 3 years, we were like, okay, that's really cumbersome. It's cumbersome for staff. We don't believe that that was the original intent of the board. And so we've clarified some of that language. So I will say for most of that, we, in that particular resolution, we've just made it more clear and more specific as to what it is that we need. And then, we'll have too many things open. And then on, let's see, we added language for the general manager to actually be able to delegate. So previously, the only authority or signing authority was delegated to the general manager from the board. And then she could also delegate on a temporary basis her authority to the deputy general manager or assistant general manager, in her absence. This will allow for us to now, as we're moving through and we know that we have all of our controls and everything in place, to allow for there to be what you would call a written warrant that would be issued, or a written delegated authority, right? That would be issued toward other people that the general manager saw fit to be able to engage the district. Another one is, again, as we mentioned, the liquidated and delinquent debt. Additional language to include LTD's requirement as part of an evaluation on a bid or proposal to determine if the bidder or proposer owes a liquidated and delinquent debt to the state of Oregon. So we always check what's called the excluded parties list, or the system for award management for federal exclusions, but we didn't have anything in our policy that says that we would also check the excluded parties list for the state. And so because we didn't have that outlined, we wouldn't be able to exclude a bidder from bidding or count them as non-responsible if they were on that list. So this language, adding this language, allows us to do that. And then clarifying the amounts of retainage. So just in various different things on construction projects and things like that, we've kind of gone back and forth, 10%, 20%, whatever that is. But the state of Oregon has very prescriptive requirements regarding retainage, how long you can hold it, how you have to hold it. We have to pay interest, on it, and when you have to release it. So we're just adding that language, that very specific prescriptive language, into our policy to make that clear. And we say other minor changes. I think on the, where we wanted to do is, whereas before, in terms of clarifying language, like we had these very small things that we let build up over the 3 years that legal counsel was like, well, we know what the intent of the board is, but this is what that seems to imply. That allows us, not staff, but staff with legal counsel, to make minor changes in the language for clarification purposes, as opposed to having to bring every single thing back to the board. It just kind of helps us operationally be able to proceed. Does that help?
Yes, it does. Thank you very much for some of that history and just those clarifications.
Perfect. Sounds good. Does anybody else have any questions? Mark, Susan, Wendy? I don't. Okay. I just have a couple. I think I'm sure that at some point we'll see a copy of the procurement document again, because this will go before the board. In the past, we've gotten kind of the red line edits for that. So I'm assuming we'll see something like that in case someone has a discrepancy about where a comma might be placed. It's that sort of thing. So this isn't a final draft. This is just saying, here are the outlines of the recommended changes. Okay.
Yes, and we can provide the red line. We decided not to in the board. I think the board package has already gone out, but I think that what we can do is provide that to you. I'm sure. I heard from.
Thank you. I was just going to say, I think that would be helpful, because I think this actually falls on the consent agenda, and I just want to clarify whether or not that's appropriate based on this committee's recommendation. Or if we can make that recommendation even, I'm not sure. Mark's nodding, but he's muted.
Yeah. We, yeah, you can make the recommendation to, accept the changes, and we can send out the red line version to the board. And we can send that out. You got that available, right, Wendy or Kalina? So we can we can just email it to you. This is the red line version of the copy of the board packet, and you can look at the changes. And
I think that would be good. I just I always kind of go back to, like, if I was a community member and I'd say, oh, where's the document itself? So I just want to make sure we've got that at least access available for any board members that might have an interest. And then my only other question was just kind of the timing of this, because we really haven't looked at this document since September of last year. So was this just kind of kicked out 12 months and said, if things look okay, we'll bring this up in a year? Or, okay, I just want to understand if there was like a significant timing issue or something coming up perhaps that we needed to have on the radar.
No. So what legal counsel does is they start the review in January, and they'll provide a report to procurement in typically February or March, just showing their suggested markups. And then we discuss whether or not, how do we want to proceed. I think because as an agency, we've been focused on the pandemic, it just wasn't high priority. Strategic business plan, we had that hurry up and get it done schedule for the strategic business plan. So I think that we just kind of wanted to wait. We were like, okay, there's a lull. this is pretty important. Let's kind of stick this in there now. That's all.
And just because we're the contract committee and we have to be picky and ask a lot of questions, do we have a timeline for how much longer something takes when it has to go through the contract committee versus maybe sort of the benefit of having it on the delegated authority report? I mean, what's the real benefit other than just kind of ease of efficiency?
So bringing it to the contract committee typically asks 30 to 45 days. You know, just depending on, we try to work backwards. So one of the first questions that Wendy and her team is going to say, when do you want this to go to the board? And then that lets us know what our timeline is looking like. But let's just say if you, and I said 30 to 45 days because we typically plan for it to go to the contract committee. We know that already. But let's just say we need to do some kind of back and forth with the contractor. And you're trying to make Camille's deadlines. We might not always be able to do that. And we literally have had where we had the, you know, Joe or somebody from the team, we're like, put all the information that we know in there. And then Camille, can we have till 5 o'clock to put like these fine details? So what I'll say is it asks about 30 to 45 days. And so if you look at, if it's something, for the most part, like I said, we plan, but if it's something like the strategic business plan that we heard from you all, you wanted to get going, but we heard like in October, November that you wanted it to get going in January, you know, that just, you're like, what? You know, so really that particular contract was less than 150. We could have just started, you know, right then and given ourselves a little more time. I just think that for staff, it's going to be helpful. For the board, it's going to be helpful. And there's still that touch point and that level of accountability, because you'll see the delegated authority report. Of course, it'll be much longer now. And you'll get that still on a monthly basis. So there's still the opportunity for you to review and ask questions. And I think Josh used to ask this question. I think this is his pet question every time. And so we're not locked into this, right? We can get out of this at any time. So for any of our contracts, we're not locked into it. Actually, federal government requires that we have a clause called termination for convenience. And it pretty much says that if we decide, if we change our minds, we can get out of this contract. We just have to make them whole, right? Up to the point that they've made performance on the contract.
Yeah, and I think just to support what Colleen is saying as far as the 30, 45 days, when we got a contract committee today, we wouldn't normally have the contract in 2 days, right? It'd have to go next month, right? Because, you know, we don't know what, you know, going to happen to the contract committee for sure. So that's the timeline, really. It's you got today, you've got the contract committee, and then we put it on the agenda for the board approval next month. So that's where the time comes in.
And maybe Mark, you can shed some light on this, or Clean it. I don't want to put you on the spot, so either one of you feel free. But did this get put in the board packet previously, just so that it could come before the contract committee relatively quickly for turnaround in the consent calendar? Or am I misremembering?
No, I think it was wasn't it a board item at last board meeting? And then some questions came up. We said, okay, let's take it back to the contract committee and let's talk about it there and try to get things resolved. And then you'll see it on Wednesday in the consent calendar.
And it was actually the board work session on August 4th, the public board work session that we had. That's where it came. Yeah.
Oh,
Thank
yeah.
you. I was like, I know we've seen this recently, and I just was like trying to go through where we had seen it. Thank you, Wendy, for that date. Super helpful.
Yeah, we just really felt like because there was some concern around it, we thought it would just be more helpful to bring it back and allow for more questions. Contract committee is the best spot because we can kind of get into the weeds if we needed to in regard to the policy, and there's that space and room to do that.
Mm-hmm. That sounds good. Okay, well then I'm going to tell you guys my biggest concern with these changes. And Mark, please plug your ears, because this is not necessarily meant for your consumption, but I do have a little bit of a concern that we have an interim GM And we have this, additional line item that says minor changes with the applicable authorities. And I just wonder, as a board, if we're comfortable with that, and just kind of thinking kind of worst case scenarios, what could play out of that from a liability standpoint, and so on and so forth. So nothing personal for any of the folks in the room, but just sort of considering, all angles of this type of a change. So I'm going to throw it out there and see what you all have to say about it and go from there.
I
No
think
comments.
I can.
Yeah,
Well, I was gonna say,
I mean, for me, for me, it's fine. I mean, it's really up to the board. I mean, it certainly it streamlines things for us, and I think I've been around long enough and signed enough documents and signed enough contracts where I know what I'm doing, I guess I would say, and so I mean, but it is really a board decision, and I can live with it either way.
I'd like to just also add, we have, I think as a whole, we have a lot of controls in place that we hadn't necessarily had, or it's not that we didn't have them, we didn't use them to the full extent that we could, right? Because we spent some time on this level with the board for you guys to learn and know and understand our policy. We've done some back and forth, just about tweaks to the policy. But, our first stop is compliance, just straight up compliance on the grant. So from the grant perspective, when Gloria and her team, they're making their quarterly grant reports, we have to report on procurement. We have to report on the contract and how it was. So that's one. So there's a quarterly sort of check-in that we're doing with FTA, and the same thing with Oregon, with the state. So you've got there, and then you've got your annual financial audit, which still does include a sampling of checks, of contracts, of POs, of everything, right? So they kind of give us our annual physical in procurement, so it were just checking that things are straight. They take a look at our policy every single year. We outline for them what has changed. There are a certain set of questions that they ask in order to trigger whether or not there are any red flags. And I'm saying this like, y'all, you don't know, Emily, but so sorry, I'm not
That's okay.
And then the triennial, the every 3-year FTA is really it's not a polite way to say it, so like the colonoscopy of the USDOT, right? So they're getting all into your beeswax. They know all of your business, and I mean, nothing really slips by them. I had AJ laughing because with our last triennial, we didn't have. I'm typically accustomed to all of the back and forth, and I was getting afraid because I wasn't hearing from the reviewers. And finally, our reviewer, she's like, Kalina, you send me emails, you're not hearing from me because there is nothing for me to say. It's okay. So, you're typically accustomed to that being a little more engaged. So I think that you've got all of these different kind of barriers or things that are set in place that should be able to assure you that we're doing. But what I will say in the procurement world too, there's your integrity and your name, because you can't get a job if you are not doing it right. So there's a reputational thing, and there's an integrity thing that goes along with. It's similar to an auditor that goes along to how you do your job and whether you do your job well. And it's a small industry, transit is. So you know who does their job well and you know who doesn't. And so, there's that kind of reputational thing. And that's that reputational thing for us as a district as well. We have a certain reputation in the industry, and we really want to maintain that. In particular, now respect and integrity, those are two of our values that we really want to put forth. And so hopefully that helps to allay any concerns that you have. But if you feel like you want to put in some more guideposts, we're open to doing that, to, I think, help you to be as comfortable with how we're doing what we do as possible.
Yeah, I mean, we're highly regulated, and for good reason, because I mean, there's a reason usually the regulations are put in place because somebody screwed up before, right? And so they oh, we don't want that to happen again. So it ends up we're just highly regulated, and between the FTA, the state, and our auditors, they keep a watchful eye on what we do, and procurement is always their target. I mean, they're always focused on, what are we buying, who are we buying it from, and our processes and policies in place. So.
Well, that explains why Colina has no problem putting up with us on all of our questions, because clearly these auditors are much more thorough than we would ever think to be. So it's a nice burden off of our shoulders in some ways. So. And I guess, Mark, I told you to plug your ears, but I was really thinking of, we don't know who this next person is that's going to be the permanent fill-in. So we just wanted to be thoughtful about that, I guess, is where I was going with that. So I apologize. I probably didn't come across the way I meant for it to. Okay. Any other questions, comments, any thoughts? Do we want to move this forward? Do we want to hold it back? What's the recommendation? Michelle, do you have any thoughts? Or Susan, I'll let you chime in since you're our guest for the day.
I'll let Susan go first.
I can unmute myself. I'm just wondering, I understand that there will be the 2 new board appointments coming soon. And I don't think, there should be a lot of delays, but would it make any sense if this is happening in the next month or so to have an opportunity for them to weigh in as well, so that then the staff know that they have the support of a full board rather than, half empty board? That's just a question.
It's really good thought, Susan. Thanks for sharing that. Colina, do you guys have a sense of what that feels like from the procurement side of things?
I don't know. I mean, I think that our goal is to do what makes you all feel most comfortable. It certainly would. I think Mark said, it would streamline things, right? We could get things going and moving, and it would be a help just in terms of releasing some of the workload and the work burden for the staff. Not only us, but, Camille and things like that, because we're not kind of on this sort of treadmill, running to get things done. But I think in terms of the board being engaged, think about when you first came on, you didn't know right away, and just kind of getting your bearings about it.
I can cut in here.
Yeah.
I think even with 2 additional board members, I mean, we need 4 to approve it, right? So even if 2 said, well, we're not sure, and so I don't know on this policy that it's a critical policy to have new board members come in and say, hey, here's this policy. We need you to get up to speed and figure it out real quick and let us know what you think, right? So I don't know. I mean,
yeah, that's funny because you could actually, go 2 sides of the same coin on that and say this actually could be a really good opportunity for them to learn as well. So I don't want to, I guess, it sounds like there's no rush.
They'll have plenty of policies to look at and learn. And this very one will probably be back at some point with some other changes. So
is there an anticipated contract process that is in the works that would be delayed by this?
Wendy, you could answer that better than.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. There are maybe a few potential, but it's just hard to kind of early in the process on one of them. So it's hard to say for sure. But yeah, there would be one that we're trying to get awarded for. I think it's up for bid right now, or just completed on Friday.
It could be the GM process, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that could be delayed.
Yeah. And another question I have, Mark, when you were saying it's, I think 30 to 45 days of a delay, making, just the process of going to the budget committee, is there any opportunity or protocol that a meeting can be called beyond a regular meeting so that there is no delay for staff, but just a meeting called, within a week or something like that, so that wouldn't be a delay?
Yeah, I mean, it always boils down to board availability more than anything. And it's really difficult. We have scheduled meetings for a reason because everybody gets on their calendars. It's really hard for us to schedule, okay, who's available on which days, and so it just gets harder to schedule. So that's why we have set meetings, so everybody knows they can put them on their schedule, we can get the work done and move things along. So.
Right. Yeah, I guess, that makes a lot of sense. I was just trying to think of, is there a method to be able to eliminate a waiting if there was something, and obviously people's schedules are a part of it. And I wouldn't think of this as being routine at all, but in the event that a contract was being held up because the budget committee hadn't met, that was what I was asking.
I mean, the contract committee. Right.
Sorry, contract committee.
Okay. We've got a budget committee coming up too. So it's like, wait a minute.
Exactly.
Well, and I was going to say, this is a smaller group to convene, but we always have to remember that there's staff time that goes in behind the scenes, right, and then staff that are maybe not visually available on your screen, but are in our panel or attendee list. So there's lots of folks on here beyond just the board members as well. So with that, I'm gonna, I guess, call a motion. Michelle, unfortunately, you're the only person who's able to do that besides myself. So maybe I'll let you make your motion and then I'll approve it or deny it. I don't know.
Oh, it'll be a coin toss for you, huh? Well, do we have any, other concerns that we want to address right now before we move into that? Just to make sure we've covered all of our bases. So I guess I'll just ask one more, just to confirm. So Kalina, thank you again for running through those changes for me. And so Emily, is your concern coming from the fact that we haven't had, we saw the red line version of this policy in August, and nothing has changed significantly or at all since that. Is that right? So do you feel like maybe there needs to be some more clarification in that policy? Do we maybe need just a little more time to, I guess, to review that, policy again to make sure we're comfortable with what the wording is? I'm just trying to understand where you're.
I think I just wanted some clarity that the red line had been provided and where it could be referenced for folks who might want to go back and just double check it, because I think one of the things that we've gotten feedback on from the board when something's left contract committee to the board is sometimes they don't like that things are on the consent calendar because they didn't feel like they got to dig into it enough. But then that sort of defeats the purpose of having the contract committee go through it first. So it's sort of a little bit of almost a double ask from the procurement group to present it to us and then present it again.
Right.
So that's why they go to the consent calendar, which I think is really appropriate. But when there's a bigger change like this, like policy related, it does seem to be a little more contentious about whether it's consent calendar or not. So that's why I just said it's not in there. So just, maybe there's a way to just let people know that it was available for review if they haven't already.
Sure. Okay. Just making sure. And then these changes that we've talked about today have gone through legal already, right? Those were recommendations throughout this last year, just to make sure I'm catching that.
That's correct.
Okay. And then they'll be reviewing that again sometime in January for any other just, okay. Okay. Well, then I think I'm ready to move this forward. I move to forward the amended procurement policy as presented to the board of directors with a recommendation for approval.
Okay, any discussion? And I don't think there's going to be any, but I'll just add, there's a possibility that this still gets pulled from the consent calendar, just as a heads up. And I'll second your motion. Should have done that first. Okay, then discussion. And then I'll call the vote. So Michelle, how do you vote?
Yes.
Yes. All right, Emily, I will vote yes as well. And so the motion passes. I think that is everything on our calendar. Any last comments before we adjourn?
I did kind of just want to throw out a question about schedule. that you might want to consider, if we're not having to bring as many contracts, that you might want to consider how often you're meeting, moving it to every other month or quarterly. And we could try that out for a while to see how often we would need to do that, because I don't know that you would need to meet monthly, or we could sort of do like we're doing now. It's a regularly scheduled meeting, but we typically check in with Camille about 3 to 4 weeks prior to the meeting time to know whether or not we have anything, and then we could cancel the meeting.
Yeah, I don't want to speak for everybody, but I tend to err on the side of I'd rather have the meeting scheduled and then not have to have it. That way we're not delaying anything that might be relevant and or trying to call a meeting, in a little bit of in a hurry. So I kind of like having it on the calendar, even if it means sometimes we don't have it. But Michelle, what do you think? And then maybe we ask this question one more time once that vacancy is officially filled, and or Susan, you can weigh in if you'd like.
Yeah, I agree. I would rather just keep it as a monthly meeting, and if we don't need to meet, we can cancel.
Susan, you're unofficial, but if you wanted to comment, you're more than welcome. Okay. I was gonna say, and Mark, it might be a good thing to keep on. Okay, perfect. Thank you, Susan. Mark, it might be a good thing to keep on your radar for you and Camille if you do need to borrow time back for other board members. Maybe they can take the contract committee time slot. Since some of us will already have it slated out on our calendar, just as a point of opportunity.
Yeah, so. No, that's good suggestion. We'll keep it. Camille keeps saying that stuff we need to meet. It's like, wait a minute. So
yeah, like wait a minute, you were available at 4 last week, so maybe you're available now. Okay, well, I think that covers everything unless anybody else wants to jump in, and we'll wrap up at 4:37.
Hey, great. Thanks a lot, everybody.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it.